Being at New Park for 2011, I think it was 2010 to 2013, 14, was it? I think it taught me a lot of valuable lessons. I mean, I wasn't at home, I wasn't around any of these family members. I was there, and what impressed me whilst being at New Park, I guess, was that we got up and we didn't spend a lot of time in the classrooms. A lot of the work was in the classroom, but we did things as a class. We went for nature walks. We had activities. We just you kind of look over at it and think what a time. And it was the best time then, because I think one thing I respect about that, not so much the people, but like, for me, and this is my point of view, I always looked over at people and I always saw people, like their ability to be their better selves. I'm not better than anybody and I don't want to be, but the government want to. And that's the difference. Like when a person has an agenda, they want to abuse the system, they want to, come at you with bullshit, whatever it may be. We've all been there, bro. We've all been there. This is a true story, right? When I'm around people, I don't like to get this perception that I'm jealous of somebody or I hate on somebody. I hate this idea. I wouldn't call myself a jealous and hateful person. Sometimes when I look over at people, I'm like, damn, they got a group of friends. They can do X, Y, and Z, but they're looking over someone's direction. And I think that and the algorithm, social media was created to kind of give people a way of building themselves, to kind of like you want to create content, and you want to be whoever you want to be, and I think it's taken out of context now, because they want to remove the apps, and they want to control what kids do, and they want to abuse the system, and they like what I just went off, like, I'm not a fan of restrictions, I'm not a fan of abuse, I'm not a fan of uh what's the word, degeneracy. I'm not a fan of any of those things, and I think the government are, and I think that's why the government aren't, you know, interested in releasing the rest of the Epstein files. I think the reason why we live in such a dystopian or broken, day and age generation today, that I have to unfortunately be a part of, whether or not I'm online, whether or not I'm watching YouTube, whether or not I'm a part of this conversation. I am a part of this conversation, and I can't ever look away from it because it's happening. There's another incident, there's another person going through something, and I'm trying to do my best to navigate my own life and my own life, my decisions, my choices. And I think that there are people in this day and age that are trying to kind of, like I've seen in person, through school and college education, and work, just in general, that are existing to make that, uh, happen. That they don't want to see me do well. And I don't want to be a catalyst for breaking something up that someone does. If someone does something that brings a lot of excitement and joy to them, then I'm like, yo, carry on, bro. Like, it doesn't offend me, bro. It's none of my business. But the government aren't. The government aren't the type of people that really want you to have that life, and I think that's why they really push people now to kind of have these laws in place. I I'm not gonna say that growing up was perfect, because I went through certain things, and like I was bullied, and I went through a lot of shit. But the stuff that people have to put up with now, like that aren't me. They have to, and I think that's something that you need to have a conversation about. You need to have a conversation with these updates, the news, the government of useless cunts. You have to have a conversation about it all, right? And my thinking here is, because I'm a UK resident, I'm the United Kingdom. I'm like the soldier. I'm like the soldier of United Kingdom. I'm the goat of all goats. I'm the greatest of all time. I'm the best of the best. Yeah, like, I like to quote myself being the greatest of all time, the best of this generation, the best artist in this country. There just isn't anyone like me. There just isn't anyone willing to, step forward and say this. And I feel like a lot of people should. A lot of people should be, taking offense and saying this is not how it is. This is not how it's supposed to be. And I'm the kind of individual that's like, listen, I just want to be able to go about my business. I just want to be able to get on with life. I know it's not gonna ever happen, and it's a fantasy, but people deserve to live in a generation where they are allowed to make their own choices, their own decisions, and live with them. People are allowed to make mistakes, and we see a lot of people on the internet make mistakes and do all this, whatever you want to call it. I'm not even going to go into detail, but the purpose of this was to kind of quote how the people in these spaces, they want smoke, and I don't. So, the people in these spaces that are pushing this bullshit on people, they want it. They want the smoke. And I'm over here recapping it, and it's not for me. So, I grew up in a very different time, in a very different way of thinking. And, I wouldn't say that I was around when the internet was a big thing. The internet has clearly become more of a bigger thing after COVID. And, it just continues to kind of, go in that direction. So, that's all I've really got to say about it.